Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
I can recall one time in Kandahar at about 2 in the morning, we were going after a local bomb maker. And so when we came to his compound, we had to secure the perimeter before the main assault force could come in and attack. The only caveat to the plan was by laddering up on the rooftops, one of us had to actually climb down in the courtyard and unlatch the main gate. Doing that, obviously, it puts yourself through quite a bit of exposure. So I was the guy that climbed over, unlatched the gate, and I had to trust the men behind me that if somebody popped out or if somebody was trying to hurt me, that they would come to my defense. We came to understand that trust was paramount between both the individuals that I served with as well as the Afghan commandos that we partnered with. They valued that above everything else. As a boy, you always dream of joining the military and doing something brave and noble. I decided to join the SEAL teams. I met my wife in 2008 when I was stationed in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I actually went to a climbing gym with a friend of mine.
When Cameron walked in, he definitely caught my eye.
There was this beautiful girl who was showing up all the men, climbing better than everybody. I just thought, wow, I gotta meet this girl. And she found out that I was a Navy SEAL. She was not sufficiently impressed, and she cared more about who I was on the inside than who I was on the outside. When I first joined the Navy, I expected to make it a career. I was actually overseas during the transition between the Bush and the Obama administration. We noticed the rules of engagement change pretty quickly after the new president had assumed office. I came to understand and see some of the sickness that we find when politics are interjected in military policy. Many of these elected officials who asked us to fight bravely to begin with, frankly, were dealing with American lives cheaply. When bad policy got in the way of us being able to do our job, we found it exceedingly difficult to be successful. While in the armed forces, we got to experience bad policy, but while working for the State Department, I had an opportunity to actually meet these people responsible for these policies. What became very clear was that many of these individuals had no understanding of the consequences of their decisions and how it impacted the lives of others. It wasn't long after that I was recruited by DHS to serve as a division director for emergency medical services. That's where I got to realize that as bad as the policy was overseas, in the homeland, it was much worse. Nothing exemplifies this more than when I began supporting men and women who were working along the southern border. If you wanted to see individuals who were beaten down with an impossible job, living at the business end of bad policy, they're it. The scenario at the southern border is a humanitarian catastrophe.
American defense policy needs to change. Welcome back to More War Monday here on the Rob Maness Show on Patriot.tv Live and our X Spaces simulcast. Well, President Ronald Reagan once said, and I quote, "The defense policy of the United States is based on a simple premise. The United States does not start fights. We will never be an aggressor. We maintain our strength in order to deter and defend against aggression, to preserve freedom and peace," close quote. Unfortunately, in the decades since 9/11, the United States defense policy has become the antithesis of those words in many ways. We have started fights, as Ukraine so blindingly is exposed. We have been the aggressor, as the second Iraq war highlighted. And now we have let deterrence fail without taking the appropriate policy actions to reverse course and stand at the precipice of a world war involving 2 nuclear powers and a rising 3rd nuclear power. America needs new leaders that will reform defense policy back to one of peace through strength. I can't say it enough. The Roman Empire led with military force and destroyed their civilization by ignoring the consequences of such policies. We have an opportunity every 2 years to elect new leaders in our Congress that can affect the needed changes. And this year, Cameron Hamilton of Virginia's 7th District is one of those new leaders. President Reagan's words that I read above are on his website at CameronHamilton.com. Cameron's a former Navy SEAL and has worked at the State Department and on border security at the Department of Homeland Defense, as you just heard. He's my guest today. Cameron, welcome to the Rob Maness Show.
Hey, thank you, Rob. Thank you for having me.
Hey, man, I know what it's like to throw your hat in the political arena. But I always have to, when I have a candidate on here, before we dive into foreign policy and national security, let's talk a little bit about your campaign, why you're running, and what are your top three issues that you're seeing the people in Virginia 7th respond to?
No, that's a great question. So the reason why I'm running is I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a man of faith. I'm looking at the future that this country has, and I'm concerned that my children will not inherit the same nation I grew up with. What they're set to inherit is something categorically different, and I can't sit by an apathetic bystander. You know, my wife looks me in the eyes. Children have to look at me and know that I had an opportunity to forge a better future, whether I took that chance or not. I was a division director at DHS. I was a very successful civil servant, as well as a former service member in the SEAL teams. I was approached by some key patriots. Mainly one of them was a gentleman named Nick Freitas, here in Virginia. He asked me about whether or not I would consider serving in the House of Representatives, to which my first response is, why on earth would I do that? No, but after time in prayer, to be very honest, I've worked my entire federal and adult career in the federal government. I know the ins and outs of the bureaucracy. I know many different avenues of how legislation is written. I know about briefings of Congress. So when given an opportunity, when asked by people that I respect and admire, and after quite a bit of time in prayer, my wife and I knows that this is the new endeavor that God has put us on a path for, and it would be our honor to serve the people here in the Virginia 7th, to bring servant leadership to Washington, D.C. So really, I'm doing it because I've been a career public servant. I'd like to serve again, but also like to embark and fight for the future that my children deserve.
Well, I've supported Nick Freitas before. I consider him a friend, even though we don't see each other very often. And he's one of the big reasons why I'm announcing on this show that my PAC, Gator PAC, and its veterans leadership is endorsing you in this race to get to Congress, Cameron. So you're doing a lot of what we call grip and grins, going around and meeting the voters and everything. What are they telling you that they're most concerned about?
Yeah. And again, that's another key issue, that voters feel disenfranchised in Washington, D.C. So when you have a chance to talk to them, people relate to you very frankly. Voters are exceedingly concerned about what's going on at the southern border. That's probably issue number one. We are watching millions of people spilling over this border. By the end of the Biden administration, which Lord will be in January of 2025, but by the end of his administration, we're estimating anywhere between 5 and 10 million people that have come into this country. And the estimates are, and these are generalizations. We don't have accurate numbers. That's a huge problem. It's a national security risk of profound implication. That's a sizable portion of the American demographic and population. In addition to that, people are also concerned about the economy. We see spending that's going out of style. We see omnibus bills and passages of different acts and sending more and more money overseas. Meanwhile, Americans here are struggling. The spending power of the dollar has declined significantly. Therefore, the inflation hits you like a hidden tax. And we still don't have clean water in places like Michigan or people in, East Palestine, Ohio, yet we're sending billions and billions more that's all borrowed overseas. So people are frustrated. And then lastly, one of the key issues that I'm also focusing on is accountability and oversight of our elected officials. We really lack the ability for the American people to feel that they're fully engaged and that they have good faith and trust in their public officials. Congressional ratings right now and approval is in the tank. And it's no wonder, because it seems like they operate on their own modus operandi without actually engaging and being held accountable to the American people. So those are three of the many things that I'm hoping to address with my service.
On the subject of accountability, like I am, you're a signer of the Declaration of Military Accountability, one of the 231 active duty and retirees and veterans that signed that document, demanding accountability for our senior uniformed and civilian leadership in the Department of Defense. So I'm glad to see that you're spanning that out, because accountability in DoD is only a microcosm of what their handlers and their commanders, their command chain is pushed down all the way from the presidency in it.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. When I signed that document, again, it was an absolute honor to sign it. It was a privilege. There were some that thought, well, this might be politically insensitive, and I thought, no, ultimately these senior officials and leaders, they serve us. They serve we the people. not special interest and not their own agenda. So it's time we remind them of that. I think at the end of the day, we just have a lot of patriots that are wondering, when are we going to stand up and fight for our own rights? The government doesn't exactly have a great track record of upholding them. So it's time for we the people, it's time for people that have Virginia 7th, as well as all across this country, to take back what we believe is the proper balance of power in this country. So I'm a limited government advocate, a strong constitutional conservative. And so for me, signing the Declaration of Military Accountability was a very easy decision, because it's simply a statement that we believe one of the most egregious infringements on Americans' constitutional rights was engaged in by our government, by specifically the Department of Defense. So no more. We won't sadly buy and just watch. We will ensure that our public officials hold our military as well as other branches of our federal government accountable. And if not, well, then we need to ensure that we put up our candidates and that we seek public office to do so from inside.
Yeah, exactly right. I'm not sure exactly how many of the men and women that signed that are running for office actively right now, but we need every single one because, we have active duty members that have signed that document. The author of the documents, Rob Green, U.S. Navy commander, talk about highly courageous, and he continues to speak out while he's on active duty and navigate the legal waters that I'm sure every bureaucrat in the Department of Defense in and out of uniform is tracking on him closely to see when they can catch him. So I'm really glad to see a lot of people running for office. This seat, though, the leading Democrat opponent is going to be important too. And I think based on all the candidates that I've seen, you're the best person to take this guy on. Who is he and why is he that important?
So the leading Democratic candidate right now is someone named Yevgeny Vindman. He is an American born in Ukraine with a twin brother, Alexander Vindman. Alexander Vindman was one of the gentlemen that made headlines all over the news by testifying under oath of Congress when Trump was impeached for the Ukrainian phone call. His brother Yevgeny, or Eugene, which is what he goes by, was also an ethics JAG officer working within the National Security Council. So they were radical anti-Trumpers, which, again, I care not whether they're pro or anti-Trump. I care about whether you're effective in doing the job. I do believe in public service while serving in uniform as well as in civic life. You should keep politics out of your professional work life. But these individuals were extremely politically active, I'll put it that way. And so right now, Eugene Vindman has raised, I think by some estimates, up to $3 million. He's clearly the leading front runner. He's been promoted by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. And again, you also have Adam Schiff from California. Even the actor Ben Stiller is promoting him. So he's the Hollywood celebrity on the Democratic ticket. The unique thing about Yevgeny Vindman that most people don't realize is that in addition to him opposing Trump, he also was a JAG officer working within the NSC who punished service members who didn't adhere to the vaccine mandate. That is a less well-known element of his prior service. Not only that, but he punished, again, Charles Bashaw, but even bragged about it online about the prosecution. He was one of the first people to ensure that a service member who did not adhere to the vaccine mandate was properly punished and ultimately kicked out of the services. So there's a very, very unique perspective going on here. You couldn't have two more polar opposites on this issue. Myself advocating staunchly for medical freedom while I was at the Department of Homeland Security. I actually signed up to be a class agent for 2,000 employees to sue the federal government over the unconstitutional mandate of Executive Order 14043 mandate, and then bragged about it. So it is quite simply a liberty versus tyranny argument. And I would agree, I believe I'm the best candidate, not because necessarily that one issue, but I believe I'm the best candidate in this race because I have had a preponderance of experience across 3 different federal agencies under 4 different administrations. I'm the only candidate in this race that's written and drafted legislative language. I've actually briefed members of Congress on governmental programs, and I've managed it from the ground tactical level all the way up to the director and associate director level within the federal government.
Yep, you're exactly right, man. And we are very interested in your take on policies that you're going to work on, especially in national security and foreign policy. So we'll break the world up by the Israel conflict, the Ukraine conflict, and then the challenge with the big adversary in the world today to freedom in the United States, China, in the last segment. And we'll be right back after this break with Cameron Hamilton, congressional candidate for Virginia 7, key district and we need him. As you could see, he's right on the Constitution, and that's where we need our legislators to be. We'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show at Patriot.tv Live and X Spaces simulcast.
Darktalk.com, darktalk.com. Now you hit that website, that's exclusive to Patriot.tv, so you're able to also help your family and support our network to keep us going as well. Let's go to not only satellite phones, but then you just have regular phones as well, regular mobile phones as well. So you can click satellite phones, or you go back to the top, click secure phones. So this gives you various cell phones.
We are protecting your privacy in ways that no one else does. We've talked about how your cell phone is a government tracking device, how it archives where you've been, what you're up to, who you're talking with, what you're searching on the web, and that information is not private. It is available to the cell phone companies and often sold or used against people in court, right? With these phones, and I'm not trying to say that these are for criminals, these are for people who want the privacy that they are afforded by the Constitution, right? Because we don't think that it's our job to track you. It is our job to provide you with communications so you can go about your daily life.
We've learned through the pandemic we can never be caught unprepared again. And so many Americans, when COVID hit, they had nothing in the house. Stores were shut down and doctors' offices were shut down. And even if doctors prescribed drugs, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, pharmacists wouldn't fill the prescriptions. That was a nightmare.
Now the situation is much worse. We have these horrible supply chain problems. In our emergency medical kit at the Wellness Company, we have 8 prescription drugs that are all potentially life-saving.
Most people who died with COVID, they died in the hospital because they didn't receive early treatment.
Every American family should have one of these.
I can tell you the Wellness Company kit is the answer.
I want to ask you more broadly, because people like Senator Van Hollen, who is going to be on here, will talk about the principle and the spirit and the meaning of U.S. law. And you know that past presidents have withheld military aid to Israel to force changes in behavior. President Reagan did that. President Bush did that. Why do you have a problem with President Biden doing it?
Well, first off, when you talk about the principle and the spirit of U.S. law, it sounds to me like not talking about the letter of U.S. law, because Tony Blinken's own report concluded they did not violate U.S. law. Ronald Reagan's decision to pause the delivery of fighter jets in the 1980s was totally different from what happened here. Israel's fighting a war of survival against a terrorist group that committed the worst atrocity against Jews since World War II. In the 1980s, an Israeli ambassador had been targeted for assassination. Ronald Reagan knew that the pause of fighter jets would not interfere with Israel's fighting because they had plenty of fighters. He did not pause munitions. Joe Biden is not sending munitions in the middle of a shooting war that's a war of survival. And look at the broader context. Israel knew that Ronald Reagan had its back in the region. He sank half of Iran's navy. Joe Biden has consistently given Iran hundreds of billions of dollars of sanctions relief that exactly funded groups like Hamas and Hezbollah.
They dispute that, and they are still sending weapons. But last month, Donald Trump told Time magazine Bibi Netanyahu rightfully has been criticized for what took place on October 7th. Do you agree with that assessment? Are you comfortable with any criticism of the prime minister?
Look, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu and other senior Israeli leaders have acknowledged they have responsibility for the failures on October 7th. And they've said, as the Israeli custom, when this war is over, there'll probably be a commission of inquiry to figure out exactly what went wrong to ensure it doesn't happen again. But President Trump said just last night that he would absolutely provide Israel with the weapons they need to finish the job. This would have never happened on President Trump's watch. It didn't happen on his watch. Wow. And if he were president, this war would have probably already been over with much less civilian suffering in Gaza because he would have backed Israel to the hilt from the beginning.
Well, that's a debate on counterfactuals for another day, Senator, but it's good to have you here in person.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show at Patriot.tv. We're live and we're on our X Spaces simulcast, and our guest today is Cameron Hamilton, a congressional candidate for Virginia's 7th District to replace, I think it's Abigail Spanberger. And he's got an opponent named Benjamin's brother drove the Ukraine impeachment on Donald J. Trump. because Donald Trump was talking about not holding up weapons that had been approved by Congress. Cameron, I wanted to play that clip as they're the opening to our discussion about the Israel and the wider Middle East and the United States and our allied role in the area there, because just to lead it off with that discussion about the potential for impeachment here, it certainly looks like Joe Biden is actually doing what Donald Trump just talked about and was actually impeached for out of the House of Representatives.
Oh, he absolutely is. That's why a good friend of mine, Corey Mills, again, congressman from Florida, he's actually endorsed my campaign, and I'm honored to have his support. He introduced articles of impeachment against the president, and I would really be interested to see how that bears out. Corey wants to force a vote because he wants the American people to see exactly what representatives believe that Joe Biden should be removed from office and which one not. And there's a variety of different circumstances. There's 3 different specific clauses and allegations made within his articles of impeachment. And I completely agree. We see this current president. He's bragged about it before he ever became president, about withholding aid from Ukraine if they didn't fire a certain prosecutor. And again, we have recordings of this. These aren't allegory or hypotheticals. We have video recording evidence to show that Joe Biden has been a corrupt politician pretty much as long as we've known him. And so I'm hoping that more and more Americans will wake up and realize that, under Donald Trump, at least he had a greater economy, greater national defense, and so many other circumstances that were far better in this nation. So I really do hope that November will be the proving ground as it pertains to this current aid with Israel. We have an agreement. Congress has passed bills, and I think that the fact that this administration is withholding certain munitions is a mistake. It's a categorical mistake, and it also, even if it may not necessarily dwindle their reserves, because Israel has a very robust military complex, even if it doesn't, negatively impact their reserves, it does clearly send a message internationally and overseas that the United States might not come to Israel's defense quite in the same way it would before, which I think would ultimately result in more emboldened behavior out of some of Israel's aggressors and some of their enemies, which is a good thing for peace and stability. Right now, we need to project strength, and I think this is not the way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it sends a real clear message to Hamas to just hang on. We're going to come in and save you, being the West and everything. Well, we've got a hand up over in the audience. So let's go ahead and take one question for this segment before we dive a little bit further into the broader subject of Israel and Middle East foreign policy and national security. Go ahead, Bill. Who's first over there?
Sofa, go ahead.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Carl. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. When you get into office, I am not aware if there exists a caucus that primarily focuses on the military. Like I don't want to call it a military caucus. That sounds really unconstitutional. But a caucus created and formed of primarily veterans that are concerned about the treatment of the military. And there are so many of these issues that have implications on the military. Will you be part of that caucus? And if it doesn't exist, will you create one?
That's a great question. So there is a Veterans Caucus right now in the House of Representatives. You have the same actually equivalent in the Senate. The Senate's obviously smaller, and it goes by a different name. But the Veterans Caucus, I would be honored to join the Veterans Caucus. Again, I'm a combat vet, served 2 combat tours in Afghanistan and 2 additional tours in support of other missions within Operation Enduring Freedom. So I would be honored to join that caucus and be honored to advocate for military benefits and for the service members that have served, that are serving presently, as well as those that have served before. And even, to be honest, creating mechanisms in place to create incentives for those that want to serve in the future. So yes, that caucus does exist. It would be an honor to join them, and I'd be an absolute honor to help ensure that we represent veterans very actively within the House of Representatives.
That's a great question, Wib. Thank you very much for asking that. Cameron, as we talk about Israel and the broader Middle East and our policies going forward here, look, Israel was attacked in the worst attack on Jewish civilians since World War II and the Holocaust on October 7th, 2023. As a professional military officer, it's my opinion that they have every right to not only defend themselves, but eliminate that threat completely, just like the Allies did the Nazis and the Empire of Japan in World War II, because it's that level of threat and level of activity There's a debate about that, though. I'm not sure that the West collectively or the United States actually understands what total war is, and that's essentially what Israel is doing in its response to this October 7th. And moving forward, how would you propose we change our foreign policy through the funding mechanisms in Congress, which is your greatest power, to improve where we're at in the world and reset ourselves back to a peace through strength strategy when we have this kind of thing going on?
I think right now we have a crisis of leadership, and it's not just in the White House. It's not just at the cabinet level for appointees, president. It's also inundated and inculcated within our military service members in the ranks themselves. We have so many phenomenal, mid-level and lower-level service members, and frankly, some of our military leadership needs to go. So one thing that I would actually advocate for is basically a mandatory retirement of virtually every general officer across the armed forces and promote from within the armed forces. We are so top heavy of general officers and flag officers in the military, and many of them are great people, but again, we've weathered some of the most egregious unconstitutional mandates, and we've seen this huge decline of our military readiness because we're focusing on social issues rather than actually focusing on combat lethality. So I think we need new leadership all across the military, and I think that picking 05s, 04s, and key individuals and promote them up from within would create the right environment for that good habitual turnover, also create competitive nature and desire to promote and to serve strongly. And so I think that's one way to do it. In addition to that, ensuring that we completely defund any of these woke initiatives that are seeking to influence our military from a cultural perspective. I don't think this is helpful. I don't think anyone cares what pronouns your service members go by. They want to make sure that they are the most lethal and most effective service member on the battlefield, period. Because that strength is absolutely needed. It is a strong deterrent. And then in addition to that, making sure that we have strong veterans benefits packages that again, provide resources to those that serve, that have paid the sacrifice, or that have come away from war with difficulties and diseases, and also with just different injuries, both known and unknown, seen and unseen. Making sure that we advocate for them relentlessly is essential, because we'll create a new environment where young men and women are willing to join the military because they know that on the flip side of it, when they hang up their hat, hang up their boots, and they serve no longer, that they'll be taken care of the way that they should be. So I think those are some examples. In addition to that, I think that sometimes we focus more on some of the more advanced weaponry of the military rather than the actual quality of life for our service members. I would seek to enact some form of reform within our National Defense Authorization Acts to ensure that that is the case, and that we're focusing on the things that are tangible to the warfighter, and that both care for them and give them the maximum opportunity of lethality, not just necessarily the new toy that's coming down from different groups and organizations that are vying for large government contracts. I also think that we need to get into maneuvering and basic training, where we send large-scale numbers of personnel across geographical regions to prepare for land-based invasions, ground invasions, aviation-based invasions, maritime invasions, you name it. We should be maneuvering our troops all across the world so that we can prepare for another first world war against an industrialized nation such as China or Russia or many others. I think we should focus there. In addition to that, making sure that we have good accountability. We're spending so much money within our government, and it's not serving the American people quite in the way that I would want it to. So I think ensuring that proper accountability and audit is also essential.
And all of those things become even more crucially important as we look at the hotspots and wars that have sprung up around the world and the potential for war, especially in Asia. We've got to take our second break. When we come back, we'll move the discussion geographically over to Eastern Europe, Ukraine, which is a little bit different from the American people's perspective. So most of us support Israel's need to defend itself and conduct this operation that they're conducting without our interference. It's different in that view in Ukraine, and we'll see why when we come back with Cameron Hamilton, Virginia 7. He needs to win, folks. Go help him out. We'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show at Patriot.tv.
The world is about to shift. Banks are going cashless globally with the emergent central bank digital currency, which will bring with it programmable money and the ability to turn on or off purchasing power based on your digital social profile. It's like equivalent of spyware in your bank account. You need to get rid of the system with the world's safest and most private assets, silver and gold. Call Kirk Gelb, PhD at 877-547-5743. That's 877-KIRK-PhD.
Sounds rolling. All 3 cameras. We're good. Andy, speed.
Is there any regrets that you had in life? I should sit here and say, yeah, I got a lot of regrets. But when I look back on my life and I understand the lives that were lost, I mean, I'm sitting here with you. And I can tell my story.
Former National Security Advisor Lieutenant Michael Flynn pleaded guilty today for lying to the FBI.
He was one of the most respected generals in the military.
He was, by definition, the most dangerous possible person for Donald Trump to hire.
Brilliant military career serving 33 years.
Why was he being so elusive?
Mike Flynn told the truth and faced life in prison.
I interviewed a lot of working class people for this book, across the political spectrum. Okay, they agreed on, I'd say, 90% of the issues. Total agreement, and like you said, people would be very surprised to learn, where that agreement lies. There's one topic that every single person I interviewed brought up on their own. I didn't bring it up because it wasn't part of that. It's a book about the economic fate of the American working class. Everyone brought up the war in Ukraine and asked me, why are we paying for this? I just don't know. And that gap between people, it wasn't just that they opposed it. It was no one had bothered to explain to them why they should be paying for this, because nobody has to, because no one is answerable to them. And that is a true outrage.
Well, and I also think that there's no answer. Like, that's when we started the show talking about Ukraine and my question from the beginning has been, how does the question of who governs various provinces in eastern Ukraine or Crimea affect the lives of the American people in any way? And there's absolutely no answer to that, but they deal with it by just flooding them with emotional propaganda about the evil Russians and then just ignoring them for the rest of the time and serving the special interest in Washington. Of course, if you look at Congress, it's very much the same thing. It's amazing how many of them all went to Harvard and Yale in the same schools and have, billionaire families or very wealthy families who end up in their political careers.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and we're talking with congressional candidate from Virginia's 7th District, Cameron Hamilton, former Navy SEAL, State Department employee, leader at Department of Homeland Security on border security. So very well versed in all of these issues. And Cameron, that little clip right there, I think nails it and sets the stage for where this war in Ukraine is going to go. As I speak to you, Russian armed forces are making much larger gains than they have been over the last 3 months, but they've been making gains steadily the last 2 months. But now they're headed towards the northeastern city of Kharkiv, if you are Russian, and their front is increasing all along the entire front line area there. So, I've long said that the Ukrainians were pulled into this by NATO and the United States, and we wouldn't back down, and that's why Putin said, I'm going to go in, and he did. Unfortunately, I don't agree with it, but I understand the why when looking at the state of play of the geopolitical arena that Russia was facing. But the average American that's paying the bills, as you just heard right there, every one of us, why are we giving this money? Because, as you pointed out, we have a lot of things going on. We can't recruit people into the military. You can't have a deterrent force without being able to meet your recruiting goals. We're not building what we need to build as far as new platforms or even replacing current platforms. And we can't even provide the amount of artillery shells that's needed to conduct this kind of industrial level warfare. So what is your approach to this issue going to be when you get into Congress?
I think one of the things that we saw with the current House of Representatives was the bundling of this bill with other foreign aid packages, which I thought was incredibly a foolish decision. lacks accountability and transparency. It produces these bloated omnibus bills that are just incredibly fiscally irresponsible. I want people to realize, too, is that when it comes to funding for Ukraine, most people want there to be peace. The conflict is all said and done. We're looking at possibly over 1 million people who have lost their lives. This is awful. And I have no love for Russia. I think it's a terrible, nasty, awful conflict. And I hope that we have peace, because I abhor the shed of any innocent blood anywhere, regardless of the side that they're on. Having said that, is it the responsibility of the American people to finance the war, to produce basically securities that we're borrowing and sending this money overseas? The securities we're printing to ultimately allow others to garner and buy our debt. Those securities we're paying the interest on. And so we're not asking for even a loan from Ukraine. So the American people are writing a pretty broad check to the Ukrainian people here, to the Ukrainian government. And here's the crazy part. Kat Kamek from Florida actually had a very reasonable amendment to that foreign bill where she said, look, of $60 billion, roughly $10 billion is for municipal services. It doesn't even go towards the warfighting effort. Let's strip that from the bill so at least we can have greater confidence. That amendment failed. So again, prime example of what the heck are we doing here? We are just sending money overseas left, right, and it's absurd. So I oppose these funding bills. I think we have to justify to the American people why we have such crime and such out of control life in inner city communities. Again, like I said earlier, why we have people in Flint, Michigan that still don't have clean water, yet we're printing billions of dollars that we don't have and sending it overseas. I detest legislation like this. So I would radically oppose it, and I would want us to serve the American people first. I think we also need to recognize, too, is that the more money that goes into this conflict, the longer it will be lengthened. It's Somalia, look at so many other places where, frankly, the years and years of fighting has just created such a havoc on that society that they've never emerged on the other side of it. I think we need to learn from our mistakes, and we need to stop getting into international nation building.
You're absolutely right. I'm not opposed to the Ukrainians being able to defend themselves, but look, the matter of fact is that the United States and NATO messed around in this area and did some very wrong things that generated some of the responses, especially this latest one, Russia. And again, I'm not a fan of his either. But what I am concerned about is the risk that our continued poor decision making on this is creating. Not only risk of nuclear confrontation with Russia, but the risk beyond Europe, Eastern Europe, and into Western Europe, and more flare up in the Middle East, because we know the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians and the Syrians are all working very closely together. The North Koreans, we would add, they're all selling and buying military arms from each other. Russia's selling energy to get the dollars, and it's gotten past the sanctions that NATO and the European Union and the United States have put on them, and their GDP is actually bigger than it was when they started. So I don't think if there's a goal out there to reduce Russia, like Lindsey Graham keeps talking about on the cheap, then you're having the opposite effect, and it keeps getting more and more and more expensive. And like you said, we have people in Flint, Michigan that still don't have clean water. My goodness. Well, we've got another hand over in the audience. We'll take that question, Bill. Go ahead.
Okay, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Colonel Mathis. This may seem like a strange question, but this has been something that's popped up in my mind lately. Once we get the President Trump back in and we get all of these socialist people out of office and we get our country back, how fast are we going to be able to change the military back to what it used to be and change everything so that the American people are safe and we can start relaxing, so to speak?
That's a great question. One of the first recommendations I'll have is we put either someone like a Jocko Willink or someone else as Secretary of Defense and just let him clean house. Just go to work and gut a lot of the military waste and really look at where we need to promote good fostering military leadership. There's also a proposal to make Corey Mills, Congressman from Florida, the next Secretary of Defense. He'd be phenomenal. I think we need a true warrior at heart, willing to take back the reins of our military and put it back on track. My estimation is that this has to be a cultural change that we have in the armed services. It's going to take every bit of 4 years, but I think we would see substantive impact in 12 months, in 18 months, in 20 months. I think the American people would see we are clearly heading in the right direction. So I don't think it would take long for us to have good faith and confidence that, okay, we're cleaning up this mess, we're getting on a better footing and a better path. But I do think it would every bit of the entire 4 years of the Trump administration. Really, more likely, it would take between 8 and 12 years to drastically change the nature of our armed services in a sustainable fashion. And so easier said than done, of course, but I think Trump could do it in 4 years if he appointed the right kind of warrior general to take over the Department of Defense. And then you have the right cabinet secretaries to take over the Army, Navy, Air Force, you name it. I do believe very firmly that we could make some change, and we would see some drastic improvement here in as little as 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, I would just add to that. First thing I would do if I had that opportunity to be sec'd up is take the first 7 days to eliminate all DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is cultural Marxist indoctrination. And what you have to do is eliminate the funding, eliminate the positions. But that's only the first step. As you said, I could have to go beyond the Trump administration because we've been indoctrinating cadets at the cadet level for 3 years now on this Marxism overtly. There's no telling how long we've been doing it in the background, even Trump was in office, because people were doing things that we know they shouldn't have been doing. So that's the first step, but it's going to take years. And you mentioned before, we've got to empty out the flag and general officers, and we were going to have to go down to the 05 level at a minimum. But we've also got to root out any of people that bought into the cultural Marxism, eliminate them from the services. So it's going to take a long time to do that. I like the idea of conducting a Louisiana maneuver type exercise, but globally. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but that's where General Eisenhower came from. Patton Bradley all sprang out of that exercise before World War II. Starts lieutenant colonels and brigadier generals, and that's how they eliminated a lot of the dead wood in the flag officer and general officer area too. So you got to do that. But in order to do that, go ahead.
Yeah. I think if we focus on combat operations and those kind of practical skills tests, I think, to be honest, this DEI nonsense is going to fall by the wayside. Because I think when you push your armed forces to be prepared for a variety of circumstances, I really do believe that it's going to be a self-correct tool. A lot of these issues are going to start to fall away because all of a sudden unit commanders are going to realize, oh, none of these things enhance our ability to respond to actual nation-state conflict.
Absolutely right. And that's my third thing is eliminate all functions in the U.S. Armed Forces that don't have anything to do with finding and killing America's enemies, which is what the mission of the Department of Defense is supposed to be about. We're going to take our last break, Cameron. When we come back, I want to talk about the big problem in the room that nobody wants to talk about. You can call it the elephant or you can call it the panda bear, but it's China, communist China, that is the big adversary that we're not prepared to deter. And we'll be right back with Cameron Hamilton from Virginia 7 on the Rob Maness Show at Patriot.tv.
BellaPatriot.com. Let me explain to you what this is. This is an elixir. It's a daily elixir. It is a collagen, and it also has something known as astaxanthin that crosses the blood barrier that's with antioxidants that on the free radicals. And then it has a thing called cat's claw. That is from a bark on a vine in Peru. So these are three very powerful ingredients. Now, if you go to BellaPatriot.com, there are your science and clinical trials, right? And if you want to read the science, there it is. You don't get nearly 80 clinical trials for nothing. So again, you want to talk about science, the information behind it. This is it. We highly urge you to check it out. Results for Melissa and I have been very powerful. She and I take it each and every day. It's very simple. You just rip the top, drink it, and then throw away the container. We would urge you to go there, order it now, click and order now, and get your subscription.
Consumers often ask, what should I expect when I take the Bella Grace Elixir? And the answer's varied. It really depends on what your health and wellness needs are. I would consider this as your foundational core product for a whole range of health and wellness issues. Let me give you a few examples. If you're a little bit older and you have some joint health issues, some problems with mobility and comfort, the elixir is going to be your best friend. If you have some skin health issues, wrinkles, hydration, aging, all of those elements are going to be benefited from the elixir, including age spots. Now, if you're in a younger demographic, maybe visual health is where you need some assistance. Eye fatigue, dry eyes, all of those are going to be benefited by the elixir. It's a core product because it benefits so many.
Here at La Paz Sand Dunes in northwest Philippines, just a few hundred kilometers from Taiwan, the Philippines and US military are conducting live fire counter-landing drills. Using infantry and artillery, they're practicing pushback enemy forces that have landed on this beach.
The defense operations practically and the fires that we from surface to the sea, the artillery fires, that's particularly to defend from forces coming the outside landing to our land.
It's all part of Balikatan 2024, key drills between the Philippines and its defense partner, the US. This year they are more expansive than ever, taking place outside the Philippines' territorial waters in the South China Sea, reflecting the Philippines' determination to stand up for its sovereignty in the face of rising territorial aggression from China.
I think the Philippines and the U.S. have a shared vision of a free and open Pacific, right? That's grounded in transparency. It's grounded in the respect of sovereignty. It's grounded in the seeking of peaceful solutions. Again, make no mistake that if there can't be a peace solution, we have an obligation to our countries.
But the drills are also taking place in areas facing Taiwan, another potential flashpoint, and a country also subject to Chinese aggression, also one that, like the Philippines, relies on the US for its defense. As China ups its claims and aggression towards Taiwan, neighboring Philippines has been watching. And defense partner, the US, is keen to look at how areas like this one could play a role in the event of conflict. Alex Chen and Rick Lowett in Ilocos Norte, the Philippines, for Taiwan Plus.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show here at Patriot.tv. We're live and we're on our X Spaces simulcast, and our guest today is Cameron Hamilton, former U.S. Navy SEAL, State Department employee, and Department of Homeland Security official, talking about More War Monday and the policies that he's going to advocate for and push for when he gets to Congress in Virginia's 7th District. And Cameron, I couldn't do this show with you without diving into China because, I go back to President Reagan's statement. That's what I grew up on, both before I was in the military, when my dad was in the Cold War, and in the military where I was in the Cold War, all the way till the very end of the wall falling and the Soviet Union disintegrating. But without a good foundation, Americans volunteering to join the U.S. Armed Forces, without the right capabilities, and most importantly, without the manufacturing base we need in places like where I live on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. The Gulf Coast of Mississippi should be the creator and the incubator of the 21st century United States Navy that is built to deter China. And this is the AOR where I would do the Louisiana-style maneuvers if I were the next Secretary of Defense, because we've got to do it in every domain. We've got to test our leaders. We've got to test the capabilities that we have now, and we've got to test our manufacturing system to be able to keep up, because we can't even produce enough 155 shells, artillery shells, to keep Crane in business full-time in the war that they're fighting. And this war will be much different, much bigger, and much more difficult, because you're not talking about a ground war with artillery all over the place. You're talking about being able to control the sea and the air primarily, and the space domain over a very vast, large area like we were able to accomplish in World War II.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is a very complicated and nuanced, conflict that we're seeing here. And the conflict hasn't really kicked off yet, but I think most people are seeing very clearly that it looks as though it will happen. I think this is what you get when you have weak leadership. You have emboldened nations like China and the others that see an opportunity. So they're going to take it. I don't think that they're going to need Taiwan under President Trump, but they absolutely would try to do it under President Biden. So it's, again, it all the more reminds us why we need to make sure that we vote out this administration, because we can't continue the path that we're on. I do like and appreciate that you've mentioned about the sensitivity and delicacy of our economy. I think this has brought up another big issue about what does it mean to have America's policies. We don't manufacture in this country the way that we used to before. We receive so much overseas. That's our economy and our defense infrastructure and our national defense in general at risk, and is vulnerable, I'll put it that way, to outside agitators really making a drastic impact. We need to pay attention. That's a big problem. That's a major, major problem. So I think with what we're seeing right now with Taiwan and the Philippines, it's good that we're engaging in training efforts, but I think that we have to also recognize, can we stand a war with China? Can we withstand a war where they're fighting for Taiwan? Now, Take the island of Taiwan from mainland China is not as easy as people think. It's a complicated endeavor with over the horizon operations, vessels, with aircraft. It would be a very costly maneuver, and China wouldn't just show up and all of a sudden take over from day one. They would suffer greatly at the hands of the Taiwanese military impelling their forces. And so I think we need to really reevaluate what kind of a negotiated peace that we have in this region, which is why I think that we need to broker with China so we can avoid war as opposed to wanting to expand this aggression in the region with our weak and ineffective leadership. I think to create an economic environment where it's more profitable for nations like China to not pursue conflict through trade and through other means. But I think right now, again, we've made a very difficult bed. We don't manufacture the same resources as we used to, so our nation is not as resilient as we used to be in the past to weather conflict like on multi-fronts. And we also have energy insecurity because we're not drilling and tapping the natural reserves we have. Tanks, aircraft, vessels, they all need fuel of some form. And so we're not using our own reserves, which is a huge problem. In fact, we've depleted our petroleum reserves to assist with overseas issues and to bring down gas prices here in the United States. So I feel like we're watching right now the worst case scenario of a show of the emperor has no clothes. We all know this is wrong. We all know we're heading down the wrong path and we have to change it.
Yeah, and it seems like our leadership that's in power now, they make the decision that's the least impactful and creates the most risk to a widening the conflict. And, you brought up the issue of that, China's probably not going to aid Taiwan under a Trump administration. I think you're right about that. But I also think that they do have a window of opportunity before he could take office if he wins. And I think he will win, providing we can overwhelm the system and make sure we get enough votes in there so that the fraud can't be that we know is out there somewhere. So, what can Congress do in the meantime to prevent Biden from weakening us anymore so that China continues to be able to look at this calculus and, wow, it's not very risky right now. I should go ahead and do it.
I think one thing that we can do is promote aggressive investment in certain industries in this country and to ensure that we create an environment where producers are wanting to make here, employ American hardworking families, produce our goods and materials here in the United States, munitions, arms, semiconductor chips. Again, this has become a huge issue with the House of Representatives, and now I do think that there's some focus on trying to create those plants and actually produce them here in the United States. We need to get back to that wartime industrial effort that really set the United States apart from much of Europe during the Second and even the First World War. In addition to that, I think also ensuring that our nation's partners overseas are well trained and having military liaisonships and having military readiness training in different avenues are critically important to make sure that we're focused and we're ready to respond if the time and the era hits. But also we need to ensure that someone like President Biden isn't giving a blanket pass towards these international bad actors that we see on so many levels. I mean, look at the sanctions that President Biden levied and pulled off of the freezing of Iranian financial assets. This is a huge mistake. We're emboldening further radical behavior. So I think with China, we need to not just talk tough, we need to be tough. We need to boost our American economy, boost our production here so that when conflict arises, which it will rise again for the United States en masse at some point, God forbid, but at some point it will happen. We need to make sure that we have the industry here in the United States so that we're capable of weathering it.
Yeah, absolutely. The last commander of Indo-PACOM, Admiral Aquilino, as he was going out, he said, look, in the last 3 years since I've been the commander, China has produced 400 combat aircraft, 20 large warships, and doubled their ballistic missile capability and inventory in just 3 years. The People's Liberation Navy, the PLA Navy, is at 350 combat vessels. Ours is at 270. That's why I mentioned Mississippi being the incubator of the 21st century Navy that needs to be built to deter, because in a position of weakness, that increases the risk of kinetic activity happening in that invasion of Taiwan, or even worse, kinetic activity elsewhere in the Pacific region. Some good news I just saw before I came on is that the U.S., Philippines, Australia, and Japan have created an acronym exactly stood for, but I've long thought that was a good idea, but we've had ANZAC and those kinds of alliances out there for some time. What do we need to do different to shore up our allies. I mean, Biden just called out the Japanese for being xenophobes a week and a half ago. I mean, with a man like that as the commander in chief, what do we need to do, especially until we get Trump back in office, to keep our allies on the team and help them be as strong as they can so they can add to our deterrence effect? Because obviously we've weakened ourselves. We're not able to do it alone.
I think one thing that's very interesting about progressive politics when you put it in the nature of foreign policy is that people accuse conservatives of being the ones that are imperialists. It's quite the opposite. It's actually progressives that want to be the thought police of the world, which is quite remarkable. So I think that when we engage in discussions, you find many times conservative and strong military supported leaders in the United States are willing to give quite a bit of deference and grace towards our partners overseas to say, look, we're not here to change your culture. We're here to promote an environment where it's economically and militarily advantageous for both of us to be on good grounds and to be allies. That's what we need to pursue. So I think with President Biden, who knows what he's going to say tomorrow? I mean, you turn on the news, and if there's another sensation that's enraging the political left, I'm sure he'll have something to say about it. Just because that's what we find. We have no stability. We have no coherence of message or no purpose and driven mission within the key different sectors of our American foreign policy initiatives, as well as in different regions of the world. So I think one thing that we can do is by being resolute and not assuming that every foreigner has just a little American waiting to come out. If we just give them enough money and we ask them to agree to woke politics, they're just going to be like us. That's not the way the world works. We need to live and let live. We need to pursue peace where we can, all the while prepare for strength and prepare for the eventual conflict that will take the United States by its heart.
You're absolutely right. Well, thanks a lot for joining me today. Y'all are in early voting right now. When's election day in Virginia?
So the primary election for mine is June 18th. I'd be honored for your support and vote. Please go to CameronHamilton.com. After that, then the general election will be in November.
All right, my friend. Thank you very much. We'll be supporting you, as I said, and good luck out there. I think you can win. You've got the infrastructure and the ability to do it. Cam Hamilton, Virginia, 7th District. He's the man to beat. We want him to win, so go help him out at CameronHamilton.com. Tomorrow, I'll introduce you to a nonprofit led by a guy named Darren Parent that provides equipment to law enforcement and first responders through its charity outreach. And that's going to be fun and a lot of good information in that. So I'm Rob Maness. We'll see you on Training Tuesday, Patriot.tv Live.